let's begin. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being here today. I have the wonderful Barbie Wharton with me today, and she is going to speak about the topic of avoiding negative self-bias at all costs. Now, for those of you who don't know Barbie, she's a COO, she's a speaker, she's a writer, she's a Bell's palsy and self-care advocate, and she's known for her infectious passion and continuous resilience. She's left a successful career in upper management about 15 years ago, and since then she's been a thriving entrepreneur, having and building several successful businesses. And she has, very interestingly, worked alongside her mom and sister, producing 14 dance competitions per year in Western Canada. How fantastic is that? And the theme of these events were "You Belong Here." Now, Barbie, I think that's also quite an amazing topic to bring into this talk as well, is "You Belong Here." And the topic of bias and self-bias is something that we will tie into that as well, because I think self-identity is something that perhaps people might not necessarily understand or, actually see themselves with regard to bias. So if you could just chat a bit about that, that would be great.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on your talk today. I'm very excited about your topic, and of course for International Women's Day. To everybody out there, our wonderful, everyone who identifies as a woman, happy International Women's Day. And yeah, so I'm Barbie. I have, like you said, come through several career choices throughout my years. Spent most of my time, like you said, running dance competitions with my mom and my sister. And we have closed that since COVID happened, but I'm on to new projects and new adventures now. But the theme is, yes, that you belong here. And it has been my passion and my goal to create environments where people feel like they belong. That is as humans, we are not designed to be solo beings. We are a pack, and you need to feel like you belong somewhere to be able to be your best self. So, managing teams, running events, that's always been my number one goal, is to make sure people feel like that they belong. And I've now, it's been a year now, and I started Palsy Talk, it's called, on Instagram. And we'll get into that in a bit, but I had Bell's palsy about 6 years ago. So I've created a community with numerous people where it's fantastic. It's so amazing to be in a community where people understand what you're going through.
Absolutely. And I think that, definitely the Bell palsy aspect is something that we are going to speak about. But just in general, you mentioned to me that you hadn't necessarily experienced bias, but you have dealt with people who have seen a lot of bias, especially around things like the biases that come with having Bell's palsy or being associated with it as well. So could you speak to some of the things that you have experienced and the people that you have spoken to and dealt with, what their experiences have been around Bell's palsy?
Yeah, so like I said, I've been very fortunate to not experience bias directly because of my facial paralysis experience. I have experienced bias being a female in a professional environment, which we can chat about a little bit later. But for Bell's palsy, I really feel like, especially now, there's a bit of a stigma against this facial paralysis and the impression that we get of people who may or may not be different than us. I have had a lot of followers on and speakers on my channel talking about the reactions that they get from people, whether that's at the dog park walking and just getting a weird look, or, one woman being told that she should stay home because she looks like that. And those are the things in our world right now, especially with what's going on globally, that we need to get rid of immediately. Those stigmas and that bias towards somebody being different or having something going on with their face or anything like that is not productive in any way in our society. So like I said, I was fortunate. I didn't experience any bias that way that I noticed. Maybe it was there and I just didn't notice it. I have been hugely affected, obviously, waking up Bell's palsy is sudden onset. So waking up with your face being paralyzed is a huge hit to your identity. There's a lot of grief associated with it. It's been 6 years now for me, but a lot of people that are on the Bell's Palsy Talk community, they just woke up yesterday. And so many of us who have had the experience for a longer period of time try to kind of help them through that and make them feel supported that way. So trying to do that.
Absolutely. And I think that having community is so important because, as you've said, it's a sudden onset, and people don't realize this. They think that, it's something that they don't realize that it is something that could happen to them literally overnight, and it can happen to anyone. So that is, could you just talk a bit about Bell's palsy, what it is, and what the prognosis is as well, when you are diagnosed with Bell's palsy, because we also would like to create some awareness around that, since we are speaking about bias in general, so people are aware.
Yeah, so Bell's palsy, I'm not the doctor, but just so the terms I might not get totally right, but basically you wake up and sudden onset where half of your face is paralyzed. And it comes from a virus that attacks your seventh cranial nerve, which is about here. And all the nerves in your face get damaged at different degrees. So some people with Bell's palsy will recover completely after 6 to 8 weeks, look exactly like they did before, and move on with life. Myself, there was damage done to the actual, I don't know what they would be called, but the tubes is how I explain it, in the nerves. So the nerves are inside the tubes like a wire. The actual tube was damaged. So then my nerves grew back in slightly different areas. So when, I speak, my mouth isn't perfectly symmetrical. And also, you'll notice that my eye is a little bit active when I'm talking, because those nerves think that they are a mouth nerve. To put it simplistically, they grew back that way, and it's called synkinesis. So for me, I've done physical therapy, acupuncture, acupressure, cranial sacral therapy, tried all the things, because, it's your face. And whether we really say, outwardly, it's, your beauty inside that matters, and that's what you focus on, that's not what our culture and our society is. So you put your best face forward, and it's very, very hard when you have to accept that you have a new face. Very, very hard to accept that, and very, very hard also not to be hard on yourself and to feel like you are no longer as good as you used to be, or that you can't do things that you used to do, and effectively have negative self-bias towards yourself,
Yeah, and I think that societal pressure is something that, we don't realize how much it affects our self-identity, and how much, our identity is affected by the way we look as well. And yes, we sort of take for granted that if we look in the mirror, this is who we are. But one day, you could look in the mirror and your face looks completely different to you as well, because you've basically contracted a virus, and this is now a condition that you have. So yeah, and I mean, it's so disheartening and sad to hear of the reactions that some of the people in your community have had. I mean, I cannot believe that somebody could say that, you should stay home because of the way you look.
Isn't that crazy? I couldn't believe it.
And we tend to think that because we live in the age of information, that people would be less ignorant, less biased, but there are all sorts of assumptions that sort of float around. And yeah, I suppose even just assuming that people would know better is also an assumption. But yeah, I mean, I think that perhaps one of the takeaways that we should have here is that don't judge people on appearance. And also, if you don't know, then either ask somebody or do some, look up something, or do some research. I'm hesitant to say do some research because of all of the crazy COVID quote unquote research that has been going on online. So that's why I hesitated to use the word and that phrase as well. But yeah, I mean, just educate yourself a bit more about different conditions that could cause somebody's appearance to alter. It's not necessarily, the person's fault they weren't pulling a face at you, So yeah, it's yeah, we tend to think that we're drowning in information, but that's not necessarily true. And
Yeah,
so I
well, I
think,
think
sorry.
information or no information, definitely awareness on any of these topics is key. Ignorance is not okay. But sometimes you're not even aware that you're ignorant, or you're not even aware that, like, you see someone in the dog park and your face is like, oh, whoops, I didn't mean to have that reaction. But I think the main thing to do is the old saying that our mom used to tell us is, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. So for me personally, if I really try to make an effort, if I don't understand something, or I haven't educated myself enough on something, I just try to be kind. I think that, that's pretty much a guaranteed win, or say nothing, you know, and if you're not comfortable asking, like you're saying, asking the person. And a lot of the interviews that I've done, they also really appreciate, and it's usually kids being like, what's going on with your face? How come your face is different? And if you're coming from an honest, appreciative place of wanting to be supportive, that's what you're saying. Just ask, hey, are you doing okay? Like, and I don't mind that. I'd rather somebody ask me as opposed to just wonder and look at me, kind of weird. When I'm tired, my face gets more tense and my eye gets smaller, if I'm tired or stressed, or, I'm drinking wine or whatever. And I appreciate when people are, oh, what's going on? How come your eye is a little bit smaller? Some people may not feel comfortable doing that, and that's okay. But I also think that if you're not sure, just be kind. Just don't say anything.
Absolutely. And yeah, so like I mentioned, that's why the work that you're doing in your community is so important. Do you have outreach programs as well that you're working on? Do you work with people from different backgrounds and different age groups around this topic?
Right now, it's more of a personal passion project for me. And my goal is to allow those who have gone through this type of trauma to use their voice. Metaphysically speaking, from the reading that I've done, quite often Bell's palsy or facial paralysis, especially around your mouth, comes from not using your voice, not standing up for yourself, not voicing your opinion. And I'm a person who, yes, likes to talk a lot. I do. I have a lot to say. But for a lot of my life, for the past, 10, 15 years, I just didn't speak up for myself. I didn't think my opinion, it doesn't matter. We'll just do what other people want to do, or, and that's just to put it simplistically. But in different areas of my life, I just kind of always put myself second, and my voice wasn't heard or understood. I wasn't getting what I needed. I wasn't doing myself the service of figuring out what I needed and having self-care and things like that. So I speak mostly on my Instagram lives and just have people on. We have professionals on. I really, really, really try to make sure that they're qualified and specialists in facial paralysis and Bell's palsy, because like you're saying, there's so much stuff out there that as humans, we need to be very careful about what we're buying into on all levels, politics, health, Instagram, friends, anything, right? So I really try to make sure. But then the thing is, that's making a big difference to me and making me very proud and really motivated to move forward is when somebody comes on to the platform or even comments and says, I found your page and I no longer feel like I'm alone. And that is what makes me so happy inside, because for various reasons in my past, I have, even though I'm surrounded by people a lot, felt very, very alone. And that comes, I have, mood issues. And, as women, we have a lot of stuff that we face. And I have felt alone a lot. So with Bell's palsy, that gives me that jumping off platform that everybody has that in common. and, around the world, and women of different cultures too. There's, someone I've become good friends with, and she's from Lebanon. And a woman who was in India messaged me and said that she was ashamed that she had Bell's palsy, but then when she was listening to our community, she got the courage to tell her family what was going on with her. And those are the things for me that are very important. Women, we can be very, very supportive of each other, or we can not be. And I would love to be able to participate and create more communities where people just have each other's backs.
Absolutely, and that's so important, and I think you've really succeeded in doing that. Yeah, and I mean, I think you shouldn't discredit how huge your impact has actually been, and the fact that you've been reaching women from all across the globe and really uniting them and getting them to understand their condition and to understand that they are supported and that there are people out there who can support them who aren't necessarily their family or friends. But yeah, I mean, there is a real community who is willing to guide them through the journey and give advice, and at least you can also share connections and put them in a space where they may not necessarily have been, in terms of their mindset and also in terms of their personal growth. Yeah, so absolutely, Barbie, I take my hat off to you, and it's really amazing the kind of work that you're doing. And I think that I speak for everybody when I say thank you for the work that you're doing, because it is so important. And I would like to actually touch on a couple of things that you spoke about initially in this segment. So you mentioned that you had a look at some metaphysical readings or some texts. So in particular, is that like something that you would say Louise Hay kind of text? Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I meant to reference that, but I got onto a different tangent, which happens quite often with me. Yes. So Louise Hay, number one thing, anytime something happens to me, my left shoulder's been bugging me again. It's a recurring injury, to sit down and be like, hey, what is going on? Our body is a big ball of energy. Yes, okay, fine. I lift a little bit too much weight in the gym on this and I strained the shoulder. Okay, fine. You can chalk it up to that, and keep your eyes closed and keep moving on. That's great. Me personally, there's a reason that happened. Why I'm lifting exactly the same weights on my left shoulder and my right shoulder. Why is the left shoulder? So Louise Hay has information about where you're holding that energy, what is going on in your life. And I have yet to really have a time where, if you don't really sit with yourself, that it's wrong, or you know what I mean? That is it. You just really think like, what's going on in my life that I'm either pushing down or I'm not addressing, and these aren't things that you can just quite often solve overnight, but it's something to be aware of. And if we as humans keep pushing down anger, resentment, our feelings of self-worth, that manifests in disease. And modern medicine is getting more, on track with that. And modern medicine and the metaphysical stuff working together is a dream team. I mean, that's where true miracles happen, in my opinion.
Okay, absolutely. So are you then a functional medicine proponent, or is that something that you really argue for? Is that something that you recommend for people with Bell's, particularly, that they seek perhaps the advice and the counsel of people who are functional medicine practitioners so that they can deal with it holistically?
For people when they have Bell's palsy, the experts that I've had on my feed, so the number one thing is to get the medication. I am very, very, very supportive and on board personally in my life with natural remedies and anything holistic. But at a certain point, in my opinion, and again, I'm not a doctor, but there's preventative and there's reactive. And for me, and the professionals that I talk to, all of them, you need the medication. You need the steroids and the antiviral medication if you want to mitigate the damage. If you don't, then that's fine, right? But if you want to slow down the damage, your nerves are being damaged. So, sudden, yes, it's sudden onset, but I think it's about a day and a half where it progresses, So you have the time, you wake up, if you figure out it's Bell's palsy, most people think it's a stroke, but if it's just your face and everything else, like your arm works, then it's most likely Bell's palsy. Get to the doctor. When I woke up with Bell's palsy, I was like, oh, my face just felt really puffy on this side, like my sound side. So my good side just felt really puffy because this one was paralyzed, right? And at the time I had a 6-year-old and 8-year-old, we're getting ready for school and you're finding socks and packing lunches and, you don't really pay attention. And I called my partner at the time and he's like, you should go to the doctor. And that's fine. I'll go later, and usually he'd be like, okay, and like move on with the day, but he really pushed that day. And I said, okay, fine. Like I'll go. Well, I called our doctor and, as you know, in Canada, it takes a couple of days, sometimes weeks to get into our doctor. So, okay, they don't have an appointment till say Friday. I don't know, 3 or 4 days later. Okay, fine. I'll go to the clinic. So I go to the clinic and I see the doctor. And he says, you need to get to your GP immediately. Okay, well, that's not a good sign. And I said, I don't know, I just got a sinus infection or something. Like, what's the big deal? You need to call your GP and tell him you think you have Bell's palsy and they will see you immediately. And of course, that is not a good sign. When you get the fast track to the front of the line in healthcare, it's not like a VIP line when you go to a club. Like that's not what you want, right? So I go to my GP. Yes, it was, it was Bell's palsy. So the antivirals and the steroids take right away to mitigate the damage. Quite often, there's not enough prescribed, enough rounds, I guess they would say, of the steroid or the length of time of the antiviral medication. And there's a book called Fix My Face, and it's published by the Center for Facial Recovery. You can get it as an ebook, you can get it online. And in there's 5 doctors that published this book. So that's why I like to really recommend it, because not only do you have one specialist's opinion, you have 5. So you can take that to your doctor and then they would recommend the dosage. After that, I have done physical therapy, but I always recommend anything holistic, anything natural, any energy work, absolutely, because for any ailment, disease, or anything we have, it's not going to hurt. And the outlook that you have of to be healed or an outcome of something is completely going to change your path. So for me, working on using my voice, stepping up, getting out there, it's not going to hurt. And I've seen so much change in my life by following that message that I read on the very first day. Because I typed in Bell's palsy, Louise Hay, like, why is this happening? And I clued in and have made some pretty big changes in my life that have taken me onto the path that I'm on now to really fulfill my purpose. I'm not sure 1,000% what that is yet, but I do know that I'm on the right track, and it started, when that happened.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, that's amazing. And it's so true what you're saying. And I think that absolutely, in terms of treating it holistically, yes, you're not saying, well, don't go to the doctor. You're saying go to the doctor and make sure that you are treated properly and that you are diagnosed properly. And then you can obviously treat it however else you want to, with metaphysical means or spiritually, etc. But the bottom line is see a doctor, get the
and follow your gut. That's the number one thing that I, as a human, especially as a mother, is to your body. So if you are really in tune and honest with yourself, I mean, we have to be careful to, not just hear what we want to hear, but you'll know, like, your body will tell you, and without sounding too hippy dippy, these are things I'm learning. I'm not any expert in it. What your body needs. That when you're like, oh God, I got to go to bed early tonight. Hello, like, yes, your body needs sleep. So on a different level, I really feel like if you listen to your body, it'll tell you what you need. And this Bell's palsy is stress related. And, your immune's down. Every single person that I have spoken to on my interviews has been in a place where they were putting everybody else before them, not taking care of themselves in any way, any self-care, energetically, those things. So I always ask that. It's very interesting to me.
Yes, and so this leads me back to what you've mentioned before, where you said that you worked in very stressful work environments. You are an entrepreneur as well, which is stressful in and of itself, and you worked in very highly stressful, highly powered positions before in your career, and as well as the fact that you had that kind of stress, and then you felt like you weren't able to speak freely and actually express yourself because you were putting others first. So could you see the connections there between you not taking as good care of yourself as you were of other people, and then the stressfulness actually and the stress catching up on you, and that was also feeding in from your professional life into your personal life, etc.
Yeah, I think obviously, as we always do, looking back on what we wish that we had realized at the beginning, which is what I try to help, especially young professionals when I do speaking in my industry for work about that, is to make sure that you take care of yourself and use your voice. And anything like this, I find it creeps up a little bit. So sometimes, yes, the universe will smack you upside of the head really powerfully, like in a car accident, or you get a concussion or things like that. But quite often than not, it's little tiny things that happen, and when you look back, then you're like, oh yeah, that was there it was. But you, at each little step, it doesn't really seem like a big deal. For me, when I was younger, I spoke up all the time. When I started my career after university, I was a marketing manager, and then I was sales manager, and then operations manager of that company and ran it. And the ideas that I would throw out there were totally crazy, and my boss at the time was great. He's like, Barbie, it's great. He goes, it's worth listening to your 8 crazy ideas, because 2 of them will stick and 2 of them are worth listening to. And I stopped doing that. Throughout my life. Because I started to be really worried about negativity, or if people, the naysayers. And for me, I'm a very energetic and passionate person, and I have a lot of ideas. And if I throw an idea out and it's shut down, or, there's rain on my parade, I'm done. Like, that idea to me now, I'm like, oh, that's no good, and I'm working on that, getting over that, because I'm all for constructive criticism and working meetings. But that first minute when I'm like, I have this great idea and we should totally do this, if that's slammed down, then it's hard for me to get it going again. And that is something that I realized, to answer your question, that's where I wasn't using my voice. It's very weird for when we start thinking about, the universe doesn't give us very clear path. Like, the universe doesn't make it easy. So, okay, fine, you're not using your voice. Well, I tell my mom that, and she's like, Barbie, you kidding? You always got something to say, right? Oh, well, that's true. So then I start thinking, down, down, down. And that's what I felt was happening, is I was getting really excited about things. I was excited about something, and I was letting other people's views, other people's bad days or negative things, or knowing that they're not telling me something, whether they liked it or not, influence how I felt, instead of making my feelings more important to myself, if that makes sense. I think that a lot of the times we allow people's insecurity and how they choose to project that be more important than what we know and what we believe. So if I had a great idea, and I know it's a great idea, and somebody is being negative on that for whatever reason, I would always let that be more important than what I thought. And that's what I'm trying to really work on.
Yeah, and I think that, so yesterday I had a chat with another speaker who was talking about the bias that she had experienced in the boardroom. And I think that people don't understand how much sometimes that affects us on a personal level. And we just seem to think, oh, it was just something that happened to us on that day. And we kind of forget that that's not always easy for us to forget. It is something that we carry with us, and we then sort of internalize that criticism or that bias that we have seen or experienced. And it's something that then defines who we are in a certain environment to an extent, because then you're not willing to speak up or speak out because like you've mentioned, you've got shut down and shut down, and you don't really want to then give of yourself or really contribute in ways that you would have liked to have done, because you always think, well, what's going to happen now?
Absolutely. Or stand up for a cause that you really truly believe in because you think someone's going to shoot you down. And especially, what's going on globally now, we really need to embrace and celebrate those people who are putting themselves out there to stand up for what they believe in and stand up for kindness and what people, need in the world. And through the things that we've been through in the past couple of years too, culturally, I really feel that to support people who are trying to be good and try to be supportive is very important. So like you're saying, in the boardroom, when you're being shot down all the time, to continue to try to put your ideas out there. However, I would challenge those who feel the bias towards them to understand, and it's not a justification, it doesn't make it okay, but I bet you 90% of the time it's not directed towards that person. It's coming from somebody having a crappy day, or they're jealous, or they're insecure, or they had a fight with their husband or wife the night before. And those are the things I think as women, we automatically absorb that. We automatically think, oh, okay, well, it's us. We did something wrong. So I would challenge us as women in the boardroom to really try to focus so much on our goals and the outcome, then you don't have room to see that. And I don't know if that makes sense, but you're already at that table. You're in that board meeting. You're important. If you weren't important in that board meeting and your ideas weren't of value, you would not be there. You would not have that job. You would not be sitting at that board table. You would not have gotten that promotion or any of those things. I think a lot of times too with women, we have, the dreaded imposter syndrome, where you have already walked in that boardroom thinking you're not good enough and that somebody else is better than you, or your ideas, and if you're starting with that energy, you bet that someone else isn't going to take it seriously. So those are the things I would challenge. And like we said, is that negative self-bias. You're already in your way. You're in your own way. So get out of your own way. At least don't have negative self-bias towards yourself before you've even started, and I think that that's the thing I think we really need to challenge ourselves to as well, is to keep it up. Don't quit. Keep talking, because one of those ideas is going to be a game changer. And then that bias is going to stop for sure when you have a winner.
Yes. And one of the things that you mentioned before, and that I'd like to touch upon, is the fact that you said, yeah, you focus on being kind. And I think that is so important, because absolutely, I think that we can all and should all be more kind just in general. But I think that sometimes people take being kind and they confuse it with being meek and mild and not really expressing themselves, or perhaps kind is not really the correct word. Perhaps we should use the word nice. So it's, people, especially women, tend to think, well, I have to be nice. I've got to say this in a specific way. Otherwise, these people aren't going to like me, and I'm not going to be accepted. And I've got to phrase things in such a way that people accept me for it. And if I come out and say this is not something that I agree with, and I'm too brash or too rude, when I don't come across as nice, this is something that I am going to be penalized for, and I'm going to be judged harshly because of. And so I think that we should urge women to realize that that is not the case. And yes, absolutely, have manners, have grace, but you don't have to be fooled into thinking that what you have to say is not valid. And you can still say it in a nice way, but you shouldn't invalidate yourself, or as you've said, introduce that negative self-bias before you even begin to speak.
Yeah, no, a book that I read that I really, really enjoyed to explain that. It's a really easy read, and the concepts were like really bang on for me. It's called Please Yourself, and it's about being a people pleaser. So that is exactly what you're talking about. So being kind and being nice, how I see it is, it depends on your motivation, right? Like you're saying, okay, well, if I hate that girl's top and I turn around and say, oh, I just love your top, that's not authentic. That's lying, right? That's not from an authentic place. You can be kind. Being kind is also not saying, hey, that's the ugliest shirt I've ever seen in my life. So you can be kind by saying nothing and just being polite and, oh, hey, how's it going? How's the weather? Okay. So what you're describing, and we're saying is the people pleasing is, oh, I'm going to tell her that I like her shirt because I don't want her to not like me. And that's that inauthentic being nice. And as people pleasers, as women, and of course, that's a really simple example, but in our life, putting ourselves second and doing everything for everyone else. And, of course, women who are mothers, we have kids, and of course the kids come first. So you got to do the things for the kids and blah, 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 blah. But then our relationships and our marriage and our work, and not telling the car repair person that you don't think that they did a good job because you're, oh, I shouldn't upset them. That's crazy. Why do we do that? I do that all the time. Like, my husband will say, well, did you ask about this? Oh, no. I am paying you and I'm still trying to people please for someone who's fixing my car. And it's just so ingrained in us. Those are the kinds of things that just chip away at our confidence. And we have to catch them, those small things, because those little tiny things then come out in the boardroom when you have this massive game-changing idea and you have just been shot down all little tiny things for the past 5 years. And it's not all in the boardroom. It's your relationship and your car mechanic and the person at the grocery store or whatever it is. We need to make ourselves important enough to try to adjust to all those little tiny things so that when something is super, super, super important, we're not in our own way, like we were saying before, because you're important. You're important. Your voice is important. That is the number one thing I think that we need to all learn and embrace. And I really try hard that you're important. You have important things to say,
Yes, and important things to do as well, which brings me to my next question for you. So could you tell us more about the dance competitions that you organized and what the impetus was, and whether you think that this was definitely tied to bringing self-confidence to young people, young girls, young boys, whatever. And yeah, so like, is this something that I know obviously now with COVID, it couldn't continue, but would you continue with this going forward once COVID? Yeah, well, I don't even know what to say about whether COVID will ever completely go away.
Exactly. What? Yeah.
Yes.
I understand what you mean. So the dance competition career, my mom, my sister, and I closed our company in COVID, and I did try a couple events on my own. I was planning on, going out on my own, but what I was finding is that my passion was in other areas. So my passion is, yes, to make people feel like they belong, help younger dancers who are primarily women understand their self-worth and that their voice matters. As a mother, to me, it's important that we help our children become good, kind humans. And that's where, this path that I'm on now, I'm really excited about. So I've decided that the dance competitions I'm not going to be doing them anymore. So I've moved on to being a COO, a startup company I'm very excited about. It's called 3D Maritime. But with the dance competitions, what, to answer your question, what the priority was, my mom, my sister, and I, was to give children an experience where they felt important. They had their time on stage. They could excel in their own light, whether you'd been dancing for a year, whether you've been dancing for 20 years. We really, really tried and did well at making people feel important and that they belonged there. And it was, it's a competition. It's serious. You gotta, people are paying to have a competitive environment. But the feedback that we would get was very humbling, that we really achieved that goal of making people feel welcome and feel important while still having a professionally run event. And that is something that I strive to do now moving forward with events that I'll be planning in the maritime industry for women, also on my Palsy Talk community, where we can laugh and have fun and be casual, but in a very professional environment where people are receiving something that betters their life, and that's what we did with the dance competitions. And that's what I aim to do moving forward in my new paths in life.
Fantastic. And could you tell us more about 3D Maritime and what you do, and what your plans are for the future and what you'd like to do with the business?
Yeah, I'm very excited about 3D Maritime, and the maritime industry is in a very exciting period right now. There is a lot of mandated change that needs to happen. And people, just in our day-to-day world is, cruise ships are a main part of that we work with. And the change to digitization, to decarbonize, to get sustainable energy onto ships instead of carbon powered engines, et cetera, is what I'm working on now. So my husband this is his industry, and he started the 3D Maritime, which is digital scanning primarily of cruise ships and large vessels. So that means that you don't need to send your people onto the ships multiple times every time you're doing a project. All the information is ready at your fingertips, which saves tremendous amount of flights and trips and, all these expensive activities. So an absolute 180 from what I was doing before. Of course, there's common threads. I was an operations manager, marketing manager, those things like that. So in business is business, and I enjoy it. I love building businesses, marketing, branding, making things look good, participating in industry. I'm really excited, hopefully to be heading up Women in Maritime events with the association there. Because like I said, my natural tendency is to bring people together. So, maybe we can connect with that, because I'll be doing some issues revolving around women in the maritime industry.
Oh, that sounds amazing. So it's a completely new industry to you, and this is something that you went into after the dance competitions, right?
Yes.
Okay. And so what was like your impetus here? Was it just because your husband could explain the industry to you a bit more, or is it just because you've always wanted to or have been interested in the industry?
No, so how it evolved is, he started, and I started to get very involved from the marketing point of view and helping with a startup, because that's very exciting for me. My husband's an entrepreneur as well, and I just very passionate, new ideas, and let's make a website and get the branding going and getting all your ideas out. And I'm, helping him, we kind of narrowed down the message and all the things like that, because it's a very new concept for the maritime industry that we're doing. And so that became more and more interesting to me. And as business picked up, of course, there's more jobs that need to be done. And I don't just roll up my sleeve and pitch in, and as we know, as business women, there's always jobs that need to get done. And we're in a growth stage, so we'll just do everything we can and till we get big enough and hire people. So yeah, that's kind of how I became interested in it, just listening and moving on and just being, I could do that, and going to kind of conferences and speaking and presenting is very exciting for me. I love doing that part. So just all the pieces that I've loved in my previous careers, just kind of putting them together now that I'm 42 now. So I kind of have some list of things that I enjoy doing, as parts of different career. You kind of put it together and, make one and move forward that way.
Yeah, and I mean, with the startup in particular, it's very difficult and it's very draining. But could you give some advice to people who are, in a similar, obviously not in a similar industry, but who are starting a startup, founding a startup? Because I think people also don't realize sometimes just how very challenging it is, and how I don't want to say draining, but it is very demanding.
Yeah, you need to be ready for that. My girlfriend, who is a physiotherapist, so obviously essentially self-employed, just own business, right? And she said you need to be prepared for it to be hard. And I think we initially, maybe not once you get to be 40-ish, but when you're younger, you look at startups, you're like, oh, that'd be so cool, and work for myself and I can do whatever I want. And no, that's not the case, unless you don't want to have money. So, for me as a startup, I just really, there's a couple things I would say. First is be prepared, but you don't need to be over prepared. So I was just actually listening to a talk, Guy Kawasaki this morning, and he said, with Apple, just to ship it. So he was saying with Apple, it wasn't perfect. The product wasn't perfect, but they started shipping it. I tend to fall into that trap where I'm not going to put anything out until it's perfect. But what happens is then you get paralyzed and you literally put nothing out. So my Bell's Palsy Talk live interviews, and that's not even a startup. There's no money involved in that. I would do recorded interviews, and then I would mess around with it and try to edit it and try to do this and obsess about what I look like, which we can mention is completely opposite to what my message is. So that was like crazy. And then I stopped doing it for a while. That's why I do them on Instagram Live, because it's live. I have an audience. Sometimes there's 2 people there, sometimes there's 50, and I love that. So my suggestion for someone doing a startup is, of course, you don't want to put junk out there. You need to look credible enough, but it needs to be good. It doesn't need to be perfect. And the other thing, having said that, is you also need to know your industry. So if you're going to sell lumber, you need to focus on what those customers are going to ask you, not whether your logo looks perfect. Because I would wager that if Jim is going to buy lumber from you, he's more concerned about your reputation and how you are or whatever in that industry than whether your logos have the perfect Pantones. But if you are going to be a wedding planner, you're probably going to want to make sure your website looks pretty. So to me, I will tend to fall into the trap of making sure everything gets perfect. And I would say, just get out there and believe in yourself. There's obviously a reason why you started the company and the idea. So try to keep that at the forefront. You know what you're doing, and trust your gut, and just go out there and do it. And you might fall flat on your face. I probably guarantee you will. So just get up and try again. And that's how startups succeed and how entrepreneurs succeed.
Yes, and I think that that's so important to send a message out there to people that it doesn't have to be perfect. Just start, just go with what you have right now today. It isn't, nothing's going to fall into your lap, and you're not going to just be given clients. You actually have to go out there with the intention of doing all of these things, but also being authentic. And that must be really, really important, Barbie. So thank you for enlightening us and also reminding those of us who have been in business for a while that, you know, when you're at the start of a project or at the start of a venture, whatever it is, start of a company, just start. That's the key. Just start with where you are, wherever you are, with what you've got in that moment, and just begin. And Bobby, I would like to ask you at this stage, so if people would like to get hold of you and ask you for any kind of advice, whether it is entrepreneurial advice or advice about bells, and where can they reach you? What's the best place? And I will be sharing your links to your website and to your Instagram, as well as any other social media links that you've sent me. So I'm going to share them with the interview that we've just done. But is there anywhere in particular you want people to reach you? Could you just talk them through that, please?
Yeah, for sure. I do have my website, barbiewharton.com, and everything's kind of on there. But my talks at Bell's Palsy Talk. So Bell's Palsy Talk on Instagram is kind of where I'm focusing a lot of my work right now as a startup, and really enjoying it. And on the days that kind of feel like a grind or you don't really feel like doing it, I'll watch a video that made me really excited. So I think as entrepreneurs too, maybe keep your little, like a little bank of inspiration on the side, or something that someone nice has said to you. You know, that's what I do. So that's where my focus is right now. I'm really excited about it. But barbiewharton.com it's all there.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. And we'll certainly be in touch. And I'd love to have you back on at some point as well. So we'll definitely keep in touch. And again, thank you for your invaluable advice, for your time. I truly appreciate it. And I'm sure so many people have learned a lot from this talk. So thank you, Barbie. And yeah, we will chat very soon.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor. And I look forward to being on your show anytime.
Thank you so much. Enjoy your afternoon. Bye,
You too.
Bobby.
Bye.